In this tutorial, we're going to take a quick look at the Save for Web feature in Photoshop. So what we're going to do is what's called optimizing images for the web. So we're going to take Photoshop images, PSD images, and save them in a file format that's going to work in a web browser, which means it's either going to be a GIF, a PNG, usually pronounced PNG, or a JPEG. So, just to give you a sense of the size image we're working with, you've probably seen the Tri-C homepage before. This image here, the one that's in this changing slideshow area, is 960 pixels by 270 pixels. That's a total, if you multiply it out, of about 260,000 pixels worth of information. The image we're going to be working with in our practice is 640 by 480, which actually used to be a standard size we'd use on screen. 640 by 480 was actually the typical screen size for quite a long time back in the bad old days of computing. This 640 by 480 image has a total of 307,000 pixels. So actually this image is a slight bit larger in terms of file size than the image that you saw on the Tri-C homepage. So again, that's just to give you a sense of the size image we're working with. A lot of times images you use on your web page are going to be smaller than this, physically smaller than this, so the file sizes are going to be much smaller. This is a fairly hefty size image to put on a web page at this stage of the game anyway, in 2012. So and I've got three options that we're going to look at. Actually, let me start with this one. This is a photo I took of a bulletin board in the C building at Tri-C, and it's a detail of a flyer, somebody trying to sell a used clicker. I don't think they're having too much success with it. And we're going to look at optimizing that. We're going to look at this image, which is a photo of the beautiful jazz ceramic bowl by Victor Schreckengost in the Cleveland Museum of Art, which if you haven't seen it in person, you definitely ought to take a look at it. And then this, which is a vector-based, type-based version of this that I created in Photoshop. So we're going to see the difference between optimizing this and optimizing that. Let's start with this one, because this is a typical photograph. The subject has got lots of gradations of color, shape, there's shadow, highlights. So any image like this is almost always going to optimize best as a JPEG. JPEG is a format that was developed to optimize or to compress photographs so that the file takes up less space but still looks good. So in Photoshop, we're going to go to File, Save for Web and Devices. And when you open up your own, let me resize this window so you can see the whole thing. When you open up your own version, it might come up as the 2-up version, or occasionally even come up just 1-up. But you notice you have these tabs here. I'm going to suggest you click on 4-up because it lets you try some different things, and I think this is very helpful. So here's the original image up in the top left. You're always seeing the image as it looks before you do anything with it. Photoshop usually defaults to something. Sometimes it's the last setting you used, and sometimes it seems to pick actually the appropriate file format, and sometimes it picks what seems to be kind of a random format. In this case, it picked JPEG, which is probably the proper format for this particular image, and we're going to test it out. So just real quick to see what's going to happen, I'm going to click here. You can see it's highlighted in blue. That's what we're looking at, JPEG. It's 51 quality. And for now, those are the only two factors we're going to consider. I'll click here. Well, let's go right below it. And you can see what Photoshop did is, here's the image at 51 quality, then it cuts that in half to 25, and then it cuts that in half to 12 quality. So if we look at this 12 quality version of it, as you look around, you may start to see where the image is not looking as good as the original. It usually happens where JPEG quality starts to break down is usually in either hard edges where there's a very clean line or in solid areas of color. So there's a clean line along here at the edge of the bowl. So let's look down here in this version, and if you look closely you'll see that there's these I've forgotten the term for it. The official term is compression artifacts, and if I zoom the view here you'll see what I mean. So let's find that edge again. And if you notice, the image is breaking up into strips, which is how JPEG compression works. JPEG compression starts to chunk things together into blocks or strips. Here you can see that's not happening much at all, a little bit in here. But when we really crank the quality down, let me take it even down lower than 12. Let's go down to 3. You notice that we're getting this very clear, it's called artifacting is the official term, and when we look at that at 100% again, you'll see it's going to be very noticeable that around the edges here you're getting that kind of cottage cheese effect. So in my experience I've found that a quality somewhere between about 40, let's take it down to 40, looks pretty good. There's not too much of a problem happening yet. I've found that going up above 60, the trade-off in terms of improved quality versus file size, not that much as you get up over 60. So 40 to 60 to me seems to work pretty well. So there's our quality, and this is a number we want to watch, which is a file size. 74K. That's not bad for an image of this size. Let me take it down to 51, and I'll tell you why 51 in a second. 51, we're now down to 65K approximately. Still the image looks pretty clean. Compare it to the original, there's not much, maybe in this little area here where we've got some sharp lines, it may be starting to get a little bit of that artifacting, but looks pretty good. Now watch what happens here. The file size is 64.8. And I'm going to go here and click in this box, and now I can use the arrow keys to change the number. So if I use a down arrow, I'm going to go down from 51 to 50, and watch the file size. Big jump. It's actually 10K difference as I go from 51 to 50. Now watch what happens when I go up again. So it jumped 10 between 51 and 50. Now if I go to 52, it only jumps just a little bit, 1 point something. 53, another 1 point something. 54, another 1 point something. So for whatever reason, I don't know the technology behind this, but there's actually a big decrease in file size that happens when you go from 51 quality to 50 quality. So what that says to me is that the compression is really kicking in higher gear right at that break point, and that probably means that the quality is actually deteriorating all across the image. Might not be super noticeable, but I would say that if you can, at 50, if the area around 50 seems to be good, 51 is going to give you better quality. If you really need to knock the file size down, you really want to save a little bit in file size, go down to 50 and then leave it at that. Alright, so that's that. This, as I said, this is going to be a pretty good JPEG compression just because it's a typical photograph. Now, by way of comparison, let's try it as a ping 8, which is similar to a GIF. It's a more modern file format, so I suggest you might want to use ping 8 instead of a GIF unless you need to animate it, because you can animate a GIF, you cannot animate a ping. So if you look at this image, first of all, interestingly enough, huge file size, even though you might think that a ping 8, which is using only a few colors, you can see that this is the total number of colors, using 64 colors to render this image. And so what happens is what's called, what is it called? I've totally forgotten. Oh, dithering. Okay. So what's happening is we're getting dithering in here, which is you're getting individual pixels that are using different colors to try and render a smooth change in tone, and it doesn't really work very well. So we could make this a little better by increasing the number of colors. So you might want to play with this. Let's max it out. Let's go all the way up to 256 colors. So at 256 colors, you can see the dithering is not happening much at all. This is not too bad in terms of comparing it to the original. It doesn't look too bad. You can see a little bit of dithering. If I enlarge it again, you'll see quite a bit of dithering in here compared to the original. But we rarely, in fact on the web, you're only going to look at it at 100%. So enlarging it is helpful to see the detail, but in reality, judge it at 100%. So this would be acceptable quality, but it's 165K versus 60 or 70K, which is what it was as a JPEG. So to get comparable quality, way too large a file size. And ping 24, which also gives you great quality, makes humongous files. So you can see that 500K, which is, compared to the original, it's more than half of the original. Ping 24 you're going to use if you need an image on a transparent background and you need a smooth gradation of transparency from solid to transparent. So otherwise ping 8 is probably what you'd use. So in this case, ping 8 is really vastly larger file size. So for that image, definitely JPEG. Quality somewhere between 50 and 60 is going to look great. So as I said, let's pump that up 165K, still looks really good. Okay, so we have what we want. The size you can see down here is 640 by 480. So you can resize the image on the fly. So if you want the image to be smaller, you could make it 400, and this will scale proportionally. So it's now 400 by 300. And we could go here, and now you can see that's the size of the image. Obviously the file size has dropped down. You could resize it in percentages here. So there's quite a bit you can do. But the main thing that we want to check is we want to watch the quality, watch the file size, and look at the image itself to try and keep it as close to the original quality as we can while still getting a small file. So that's the name of the game. Good quality, small file. Alright, so that's that image. When you're ready to go, just click Save, give it a name, bowl, put it in my folder here, image comp folder, save, and there we are. Now, here's a situation. Well, let's look at the original. So here's the original. It's a photo I took of a flyer on a bulletin board. General rule of thumb is if you have solid colors, areas of solid color, they're going to optimize best as a ping or as a GIF and not as well as a JPEG. So this one, because it's an actual photograph, those really aren't solid color areas. And you'll see this as we go here to Save for Web and Devices. We've got a lot of gradations of the color, a lot of various tones of the red. So even though in some ways you might think that this is an example of typography, solid color, sharp areas that should optimize as a ping, this is not really going to go very well. So there it is. Let's try it as a ping 8 down here. You can see looks pretty good, but it's 191K versus 64K. So this one really is going to optimize best as a JPEG as well, because it's basically a photograph. Now what I did though is I reproduced that same look using the type tool in Photoshop. I sampled the colors to try and match the colors up as close as I could. Size and typeface. Got to use Comic Sans here. It's kind of nice, huh? And now let's try optimizing this version of it. It optimizes reasonably well as a JPEG, so this looks pretty good, and it's 36K, which is not bad. Notice though, as we lower the quality, so here it is 51, 25, 12, you can see a lot of that artifacting happen in these solid color areas. They're starting to look really mottled rather than solid. Pretty bad here. And again, let me just zoom it in so you see for sure what I'm talking about. This is the artifacting that's happening. And a little bit's happening at 51 quality, but not very much compared to the original. But once we get down to 12, even at 25, it's starting to be fairly noticeable. So make your final judgment at 100%, but pay careful attention to solid color areas and sharp edges when you're using JPEG, because that's where the problems start to crop up. So 51 looks pretty good. Let's even go up a little bit on, let's click there. Let's go up to 60 on this one. I think that might be fairly good. It's still 40K, not bad, and looks pretty darn nice. So I'd say maybe if we were going to use a JPEG for this, 60 quality might be the way to go. But let's try it as a ping. So I'm going to leave that as it is. I'm going to go click down here, and I'm going to change this to a ping 8. At first glance, color looks pretty nice, and it's 18.5K. So less than half the size of the JPEG. Pretty darn good quality. And we could even zoom in on that and you'll see what I mean. Very clean. Actually cleaner, noticeably cleaner than the JPEG. So if we wanted to make this, try to make it a smaller file size, when you're using ping or GIF, you do that by reducing the number of colors. So right now we're at 256 colors. And we could cut that, just to see what's going to happen, to 128. Cut that in half. And what you want to do is watch to see, so let's go back to 100%. See if there's anything strange that starts to happen. To my eye, I'm seeing no real difference between these two. And we've knocked the file size down a little bit. So let's see if we can make it small. Let's cut it in half again to 64. Still, I would say it looks pretty good. Now, as you can see, what's happening is the number of colors in the color table is getting smaller and smaller, which means there's fewer colors that are being used to create any subtle variations in the tone there. So we could probably take this down to a point, let's try down to about 8 colors, where we might start to see some real differences, but even at 8, actually, I'm not seeing much. Now, one thing is the edges are getting a little ragged because, and again, I'll zoom in so you can see what's happening, because we need some different shades of blue and red to do what's called anti-aliasing, to smooth out that edge, and we don't have much to work with. So let's say maybe 16. You'll notice we're getting a few more of those in between colors. At 32, now you can see there's a lot of shades of red. You can see them in here as well. A lot of shades of red and blue that are smoothing that edge out visually. So I'm thinking probably 32 colors is where this probably hits the breaking point between good quality and small file sizes. About 32 colors. 12K, 12.6K versus 39K. So that's how you can tweak a ping, which is by, now you can also do things like experimenting with different color palettes. I'd say at this point let Photoshop pick it for you. When you start to understand how this works a little better, you might try and do some experimentation on your own. But I would in general stick to experimenting with color. 256 colors is the most, so that's the best color rendition you're going to get using a ping or a GIF, is when you're 256. So start there and then work your way down. And actually a good way to do is sometimes to take it way down so you start to see where the problems crop up. And when we go down to 8 colors, we can see problems cropping up on these edges. So then maybe go somewhere in between and watch what happens. So experiment with colors with ping or GIF, and if it's JPEG, you're experimenting with quality. You can use a slider, you can type numbers in there, you can click there and use the arrow keys to go up or to go down, whatever way you want to do it to make the changes. So that's it. In this case, ping 8 is our clear winner because of the type of image this is. Great difference in file size. Actually improved quality, I would say, with the ping 8. I think it's cleaner than even a fairly high quality JPEG is, and it's a much smaller file size. So get some images. Before you do anything with them, I'd try and guess what they're going to optimize best as, but I would suggest that you always give it a try. So we could save this image as a ping. There it is. I would suggest that regardless of what you guess the image is going to optimize best as, always try it. Let's see if I've got something else we could look at. Okay, well, that's the Schreckengoss thing. So I suggest you always try it just for laughs to see what happens when you make it a ping, or if you think it's best as a ping, get the best setting you can and then try it as a JPEG to see what happens. Over time you're going to learn what works best, but it's still always worth a little bit of experimenting. And the last thing, just to deal with a question that came up in class, is file size. For an image about this size, I'd want to try and keep it around 100K or less. Obviously smaller images are going to be smaller file sizes, but when I look at images on a website, I hate to see anything that's over 200K, because then you're starting to get into some serious potential issues as far as slow downloads. So probably a little more work to be done on the optimization side if you find that your images are coming in at larger sizes than 100K, 200K max for a big image, even bigger than this. Alright, so I hope that's given you enough information on optimizing images via Save for Web to get started. And at this point, fire up Photoshop, open up some images, and start experimenting.